I don't want to dwell on it too much today, but I think I have to address the elephant in the room, and that is that in today's gospel, Jesus says something to Peter that sounds a little offensive. He says, "Get behind me, Satan." And that sounds, I think, a little harsh. Now, if I were to say to my wife when she were asking me to do the dishes, "Get behind me, Satan," I suspect there's a possibility that I might be having a conversation with a divorce attorney. So, what is Jesus saying here? Now, I've been teased about this, but I happen to be a fan of looking to the scriptures in their original language. I bring out the original languages from time to time, and so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at the Koine Greek. Yay! We're going to look at the Koine Greek to see what it is that Jesus is actually saying. So the word that Jesus uses in the Koine Greek is ho satan. Ho satan. Now in Greek, ho is a definite article. It means the word the. Now there are, 9 different definite articles in Greek, but depending on the word that we're using, the gender and all kinds of different things, ho is one of them. So ho satan is the Satan. And a Satan in Greek is an adversary. It means someone who suggests that you do something different than what you're doing. So I'll give you an example. If you cheer for the Arizona Diamondbacks, and I tell you that I think you ought to cheer for the San Diego Padres instead, then I am acting as a Satan. I'm acting as an adversary. So when we read it that way, we see that Jesus is just telling Peter, please don't tempt me here. What you're suggesting sounds a whole lot more appealing. What I've got to do is difficult and dangerous, but it's necessary. So please don't come at me with easier alternatives that sound a whole lot more pleasant, like, say, for instance, not dying on the cross. And now we understand why we're using this word Satan. The word we use for the devil comes from this word Satan, because the devil tempts us into doing things differently than what we ought to do. He's an adversary. He's a Satan. It wasn't really a loaded term until we started calling the devil Satan. But the important part of this gospel is that Jesus says, if anyone wants to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. And notice, Jesus says any here. He doesn't specify that it's a man or a woman or a scholar or a priest. He says the Greek word tis, which is a Greek pronoun that stands in for anyone and everyone. Jesus extends an invitation to everyone to follow him. The love of Jesus is available to everyone, to tis, even to those who do not yet know about it, even to those who might not understand it. And after all, does any of us truly understand the love of Jesus? Now, when I was very little, church attendance was a very big part of my life. And I went to parochial schools. I started in preschool, went all the way up through 8th grade. And I remember when I was very little, sitting in what those days was known as a cry room. It was in the back of the church, had a big glass window and a speaker that would pump in the sound. And later, as I was able to sit for longer and focus and have a little bit longer attention span, I would sit in the nave of the church. And by the way, since we're at it, I may as well give you another etymology lesson. The word nave. The section where you're sitting is called the nave. And does anybody know why? And if you were here at 8 o'clock, you don't get to answer. Why do we call it a nave? Underside of a boat. And why might we call where you're sitting a nave? Because if you look up, it kind of looks like an upside down boat. You're stealing my thunder here, Sydney. I was gonna talk about how that is the underside of a boat upside down, and that word nave comes from the Latin word navis, which gives us our word for navy. Right? So anytime you're in a church, look up and see if the ceiling looks like the underside of an upside down boat, and I bet it does, and you'll understand why it's called the nave. But anyhow, I remember sitting in the nave of the church, actually right over here where Sydney is sitting, when I was a little kid. That was where my family and I would sit. And you know me, you know I like to discourage people from sitting in the same pew all the time. But my family was just like many families, and we had our pew in the church, and we would sit right up here, right in front of the lectern. And it also was right in front of the choir section. So the church where I grew up was shaped very much like this church, except the only difference was the choir section, instead of being over there, was over here. But other than that, pretty similar layout. And my family would sit right over here in the front couple of rows, right in front of the lectern. Now, I can't tell you that I always remembered what the sermon was about. There probably was one or two that stood out to me as a young child. But every time we would say the prayers, we would say the same prayers. And every time the worship leader would say something, we'd have the same or very similar response. We would always perform the same actions. And all of these became embedded in my being. Now, before I knew what they were, I was able to recite by heart the Nicene Creed and the Gloria. I could recite the prayer of humble access. I knew what we were supposed to say after the readings, or after the gospel, or at the prayers of the people. During the Eucharistic prayer, I knew what we were supposed to say and what we were supposed to do. And as soon as I was able, which at the church where I grew up was in the 4th grade, I began serving as an altar server. Now, in those days, and in that church, only boys could serve as altar servers, and I'm glad to say that children of all genders are certainly invited to serve as altar servers these days. But as I served at the altar, I grew into a sense of self-pride. And I was eventually entrusted with more and more responsibilities, and I one day became the leader of the altar servers at my church. I was happy to serve at the altar. It brought me a lot of joy. And I was the first one to sign up for all of the special services. So if there was a funeral, or a wedding, or Holy Week, or Christmas, I was going to be serving at the altar. I also sang in the children's choir on Sundays when I wasn't serving at the altar. And on some occasions, I actually had the opportunity to do both at the same time, to sing in the choir and serve at the altar. And I remember very vividly the day of my first Holy Communion. Now, in those days, I had to be deemed worthy to receive Holy Communion. Today, I gladly offer communion to anyone of any age. I never want a child to have a memory of not being welcome at the Lord's table. And it isn't my job as a priest to protect Jesus from his people. If I'm worthy, then anyone is worthy. It's just that simple. But I do remember my first communion day, and I remember my confirmation day, and I remember the day I was received into the Episcopal Church. I remember very distinctly both of my ordinations. You see, liturgy is meant to penetrate our hearts. It's meant to leave an imprint. And that's why we say the same things every week. That's why we perform the same actions. That's why we share the sacraments. The sacraments, after all, point us to God. And liturgy points us to God. And through liturgy, which points us to Jesus, we follow Jesus. All of us. Peace. Everyone. Jesus invites us all to follow him, and yes, that includes the youngest among us. And following him means we participate in the liturgy, and we allow worship to become part of our identity. We allow it to become embedded in our DNA. I'll give you an example. How many of us don't really feel like it's Christmas until we've been to the Christmas Eve service? Until after we've smelled the incense? Until after we've sung Silent Night with candlelight? It's embedded in us. It's part of who we are, and it brings us joy. And it's a joy that we want to share with those people we love. And in my view, that joy doesn't need to wait. Next weekend, we're going to celebrate something here at St. John's. We're going to call it Kickoff Sunday. And it's a Sunday where we're going to kick off what we call the program year. Now, it also happens to be the same weekend when the National Football League is kicking off the first week of games. But I just figure, hey, that's another reason to celebrate, right? And by the way, for Kickoff Sunday, everyone is invited to wear sports apparel of some kind. So if you've got a polo or a jersey or something you'd like to wear to celebrate Kickoff Sunday, because we're going to kick off our program year, then please feel welcome to do that. Help us kick off our program year together. But Kickoff Sunday is going to be a day when we make a few small but important changes to the liturgy. And they're changes that I'm going to ask you to embrace and maybe even get just a little bit outside your comfort zone. And I'm going to get out of mine too. I'm not asking you to do something I'm not willing to do myself. So first of all, I'm going to start with me. Okay, this is my role in this. I'm going to prepare shorter, and you can hold your applause after this. I'm going to prepare shorter and hopefully more succinct sermons. You held your applause. The 8 o'clock didn't hold their applause, right? So I've been told that I tend to be a bit verbose. I don't think anyone's going to complain about shorter sermons. But this is just the first step in what I'm hopeful will create a child-friendly atmosphere during worship. Children can have shorter attention spans. And I want to have children here during worship. It's as simple as that. I want them to learn, to pray, and to feel at home. Now, if I can do my part to hold their attention better, then I'm going to do my part. Now, in addition to this, children are invited to participate fully in the service. That's especially true at this service, the 10 a.m. service, because this is the service that children are more likely to attend, but we're not going to limit it to that. If children want to serve at the altar at the 8 o'clock service, then we're going to welcome them to do so. And people of all ages are going to be encouraged to participate as lay altar servers, and readers, and singers, and altar guild members, and more. This is your church, and you get to take some ownership in it. Now, at this service, this 10 a.m. service, for which we're still seeking a name, by the way, we're going to invite our children to gather around the altar during the Eucharistic prayer and to participate in lots of other ways. We're going to have a 15-minute lesson before the service where we're going to talk to the kids about the gospel, and we're going to practice some of the hymns that we're going to sing for the day. Now, if you happen to have gifts for teaching young children religion, then I invite you to contact the office so that you can participate in this as well. Get you on the road, and as we get more teachers, we can even expand the time that we can spend with children. And as the number of kids in the church grows, then I'm hopeful that we can, again, expand this to a more traditional Sunday school model. But for now, we're going to engage fully with those who are here. Now, families with kids are encouraged to sit right up front, where they can see and hear and feel what's going on. And we're going to continue to provide activities for young children if they need something to occupy their minds or their time. And nursery services will still continue to be available for those who wish to use it. And for those of us who are not kids or who do not have kids, I'm included in that, although I admit I sometimes act like a kid, it means that we're going to have to become comfortable with kids in church right up front. Kids make noises. Sometimes they fuss. And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's a good thing. A church with kids is a growing church. And as they grow in the church and the liturgy becomes a part of their identity, I assure you their attention spans will expand. And our youth group will continue its relationship with other Lutheran and Episcopal churches, and we will share more information with you as we get it. There is a meeting this week that will talk about some of our youth group activities. Now, these are just some small ways that we're going to make it easier for some of our younger parishioners to follow Jesus. They're small changes, but I understand any change can be difficult. I ask you to open your hearts to these changes and to understand that Jesus calls all of us, tis, to follow him. This doesn't mean only those who sit still, and it doesn't mean only those of us who don't make noise. It means all. Please join me in welcoming the children of our community into a fuller participation in the liturgy. Everyone is welcome at the table of the Lord, and all are invited to follow him. We don't have to die on the cross with Jesus. We just have to follow him. And when we follow him, we share his joy. And we spread that joy to everyone in our lives. Follow Jesus. Share his joy with one another, and especially with the young people in our lives. As we share his joy, we will continue to grow his church. And as he promised us in last week's gospel, his church will never fail. Amen.